My name is Jonathan Weisberg. I teach philosophy at the University of Toronto. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the Preface Paradox. In 1965, David Makinson posed the following puzzle. Imagine an author writing a book of non-fiction. Maybe it's a history textbook. In the book's preface, the author thanks everyone who helped them catch mistakes before it went to print. Then they graciously accept responsibility for the errors that inevitably remain. Understandably, the author believes that the book still contains some errors. After all, it's several hundred pages long, so a few mistakes are inevitable. Maybe one of the dates is wrong, or maybe the book says King McX decreed something that was actually decreed by Queen McY. Historical records are never perfect. Still, the author of the book does believe each of the things they wrote. Otherwise, they wouldn't have written them. But that means the author's beliefs are contradictory. They believe each of the historical statements they wrote in the book, but they also believe that some of those statements are false. So here's the puzzle. Where did the author go wrong? Which of their beliefs should they change? Usually, when we realize that our beliefs contradict one another, we change them. Lois Lane starts out thinking Superman can fly, but not Clark Kent. When she learns that Clark Kent and Superman are the same person, though, she changes her beliefs. She stops thinking Clark Kent is incapable of flight and starts thinking he is very much capable of flight. So what should the author of our history book change to make their beliefs consistent? Should they retract the part of the preface where they admit the book contains errors? That seems wrong. Nobody's ever written an error-free history book, certainly not one of that length. Maybe they should retract one of the historical claims in the book instead. But if so, which one? As far as the author can tell, they're all true. They researched every statement in the book carefully. After thinking about this a while, you might start to feel like the author is stuck. Their beliefs are contradictory, which seems bad. But they don't have any good way of changing their beliefs to remove the contradiction. Even if they go back and triple-check every statement in their book, they'll still have to admit that some errors are bound to remain. Makinson's puzzle isn't really about history books or historians. It's about everyone. We all have numerous beliefs about the world. I believe that I was born in October, that Gandhi was born in India, that Andromeda is the galaxy closest to the Milky Way, and so on. But we also know that we make mistakes sometimes. I've been wrong in the past. I used to think Helsinki was the capital of Iceland. Now I know it's the capital of Finland. And I'm sure some of my beliefs are still false. That means everyone has contradictory beliefs, including you. Imagine everything you believe written down in a book. Would that book contain any falsehoods? Of course it would. Nobody is infallible. So at the beginning of your belief book, we should include the following statement. Some of the statements in this book are false. So your belief book contradicts itself. One reason this paradox is troubling is that it calls the basic rules of logic into question. We often point out internal contradictions in people's beliefs as a way of getting them to change their minds. For example, some atheists argue that people who believe in God have contradictory beliefs. On the one hand, they believe that God is perfect. On the other hand, they realize that the world is imperfect. For example, innocent people sometimes suffer. Often it seems unnecessarily. That's contradictory, say the atheists. If a perfect God existed, there would be no suffering in the world. Of course, believers in God usually respond that there is no contradiction here despite appearances. Maybe the suffering is ultimately for the best, for example, so the world actually is perfect, or at least as perfect as it's possible to be. If you're interested in that particular debate, check out Sally Haslanger's Wi-Fi video on the logical problem of evil. But whichever side of that debate you think is right, the point to realize here is, nobody in that debate on either side is happy to just accept a contradiction. Believers in God try to explain why their beliefs are not contradictory after all. In general, when a belief leads to a contradiction, we conclude that it must be false. In fact, that rule of logic is one of the oldest and most widely used in mathematics. So the preface paradox creates a mystery. Everybody's beliefs are contradictory, apparently. Everybody's belief book contains some mistakes, and we all know that about ourselves at some level. So are we all breaking a fundamental rule of logic all the time? Here's another simple law of logical reasoning that the paradox calls into question. I believe that Ankara is in Turkey. Call that belief A. I also believe the Bosporus is in Turkey. Call that belief B. So I should believe that Ankara and the Bosporus are both in Turkey. In other words, I should believe the combined statement A and B. This simple rule of logical reasoning is so simple, you probably don't even ordinarily notice it. If A is true and B is true, then the combined statement A and B is true. So if you believe A and you believe B, then you should believe the combined statement A and B. But thanks to the preface paradox, we know what happens if we apply that rule too many times. Imagine I collect together all my beliefs about Turkey into one long statement. A and B and C and D and so on. As I keep adding beliefs, the chance of adding a false belief gets larger and larger. If the big long combined statement is long enough, the chance of an error somewhere in there is really high, so I shouldn't believe that the statement as a whole is true. That means at some point I have to break a simple rule of logical reasoning. There comes a point where I have to say, well, I believe the combined statement A and B and C and D and so on. I also believe some further statement, call it X, but I don't believe the combined statement A and B and C and D and so on and X. So what should we make of this paradox? Some philosophers think it shows that belief and logic are really probabilistic. I don't simply believe that Ankara is in Turkey, they say. What I really think is that it's almost certain that it's in Turkey. And you can't just conclude that a combined statement A and B is true because you believe A and you believe B. You have to consider how probable the combined statement is, and that depends on how certain you are about A on its own, and how certain you are that B is true too. So belief is fundamentally a matter of degree, according to these philosophers. We never really accept anything completely, at least not if we're being reasonable. Instead, we believe some things with a very high degree of certainty, so high that we talk as if it were certain. Nevertheless, we always acknowledge some chance of error deep down. But other philosophers think that's unrealistic. Sometimes we do close the book on a question. No reasonable person doubts that the Earth is round. Not even the most humble, scientifically minded geologist would say, well, we should keep an open mind. Maybe the Earth is flat. In fact, as the philosopher Jennifer Nagel points out, there's a large body of psychological research on this topic. Psychologists Aryeh Kuglansky and Donna Webster have extensively studied when and how people treat a question as closed. Many philosophers also think it would be way beyond our abilities to reason in terms of probability all the time. If we always had to calculate the chance that A and B are both true based on the chance that A is true and the chance that B is also true, we'd never get up in the morning. We have to think in terms of simple yes-no answers, at least sometimes. There's a big debate going on right now about how to reconcile the two sides of this argument. On the one hand, it seems right that nothing we believe is 100% perfectly certain. If we step back and think about it carefully, there's always some way we could be wrong. On the other hand, it seems right that we have to ignore the possibility of errors at least sometimes. That way, we can use simple laws of logic to get through the day. Maybe there's a way to combine these two approaches: probabilistic reasoning, which always admits uncertainty, and simple logical reasoning, which doesn't account for uncertainty. But it's really not obvious how to fit these two ways of thinking together. Let me leave you with one last puzzle to chew on. We said that pretty much nothing is 100% perfectly certain. There's always a chance of error, however small. But knowledge seems to require certainty. If you know something is true, you've ruled out all possible alternatives. If you know the Earth is round, then it can't be flat or square or anything like that. So if nothing is really perfectly certain, then we don't really know anything. It's hard to imagine how we could be wrong about the Earth being round. But you can imagine a way if you get creative enough. Maybe we're part of an experiment being conducted by an alien race, like rats in a maze, and whenever we get to the edge of the Earth or fly up into the sky, they move things around so it looks as if the Earth is really round. Like moving the walls in the maze so the rat keeps running in circles. It's absurdly improbable, but it's a possibility, however remote. So here's the thing. If some of our beliefs are bound to be wrong, if there's always a chance of error, then we don't really know anything. Any belief we have could be one of the false ones, and we have no way of knowing which ones they are. So the question I'll leave you with is this: how can we reconcile the certainty of knowledge with the uncertainty created by our own fallibility?